And now we've gone to the stitching, or the embroidery screen, I call it. So a couple things here. On the left side now we have the hoop that I'm using. This is going to be our parking. I want to park my hoop. I want to get it out of the way. This is the foot I'm using, number 26. Again, single, single. Here is my embroidery area, 48 millimeters widthwise, 205 millimeters tall. In this case, it's going to tell me it's going to take 136 minutes to stitch out, so a little over 2 hours. The first step is going to be 21 minutes. And then I can jump through the steps. As you'll see, this one's 21. It's going through. So what it's going to do, so it did those two, and now it'll do those two. And this is the time remaining, and that's what this will be. And my endless marker. Excellent. So let's take a look up here. Whenever I'm having a jump stitch, so I finished one motif and I want to go to the next motif, I want it to cut my threads. It's very dangerous to leave your jump stitches in if they're longer than 3 millimeters. Your embroidery foot can get caught and cause significant damage to your embroidery machine. This is my tension, my upper tension, and I would always take the default. You always test first your embroidery design, especially when you've done significant editing to it. This will be for this will be for stitching all the same color. Well, this motif is basically the same color, so I'll show you in another one when we do our next example. This will leave for the last. So this here is going to make everything the same color. Now, if you wanted to stitch a motif, say all in purple, and the design itself came up with 5 different colors, I can hit the paintbrush and it'll stitch everything in that one color. So it's going to do one motif, go to the next, go to the next. It's continuous embroidery. Basting box. Very, very important. So sometimes when you're doing applique or even freestanding lace, you'll have things that are on top of your stabilizer or your fabric. We can tape those down with appropriate embroidery tape, but by having a basting box, it's going to do a basting stitch around the embroidery area, and then you can go ahead and do your embroidery without having to worry about your topping or the applique fabric moving. This one has another option, so if I enable that, so there I've enabled it. So it's now you can see where my basting box is going to be around my design. And now it's out of the step 1 because it's always the first step. What I can do, if I tap this again, it'll actually baste inside the embroidery hoop, which is a wonderful option to have on here. That way you know that your project, the embroidery, will be stable, your fabric will be stable, there will be no moving of it. And again, I'm just rotating through the buttons. So let's take a look at this icon right here. So particularly look at this one, the bottom one here. 21 minutes for this stitch, or this step. If I hit the bunny comes up, it's now taken it to 17 minutes. I'll call this my speed button. So this is if you want to go faster. Sometimes that might be good. Sometimes you need to be doing a little slower, especially if you're using a specialty type of thread. So good time to talk about metallic threads. If you're embroidering with a metallic thread, you need to slow your machine way down. I'm talking about 300 to 400 stitches per minute. The slower the better. What will happen is that if you're not going slow enough, it will fray at your needle. Because the metallic thread going through the eye of the needle, it will rub and it will fray it. Sometimes sewer's aid on your metallic thread will work. You just run it up and down the spool of thread, but always, always slow your machine down whenever you're using metallic thread. And after you finish with metallic thread, make sure you clean your bobbin area really, really well. If you're using a gold metallic and you don't clean your bobbin area well, the next time you go to embroider, some of that gold metallic, I call it dust, will actually get onto your embroidery. So, very important to always clean your bobbin area, especially if you use metallic threads. Now, you don't use metallic thread in the bobbin, but just the needle going down into the bobbin area, you'll get little dust bits from the metallic thread. Let's talk about this button. So you're stitching along and your thread breaks, which happens to every one of us. You'd be in here, you'd go into, this is how you can go into individual stitches. Here's where you're going to use your dials. So right now, you can see it jumping, and I'm actually going up stitch by stitch by stitch. Here's my source. Here's the detail of where I am. This is telling me which stitch I'm on. So I'm turning counterclockwise. That's at the very beginning. Stitch number 1, 2. So you can watch this go up and count. So say I started my leaf and my thread broke. I like to go back 10 stitches. So rethread it. I'm good to go. This is at 39. I'm going to go back to 29. Start again. I always like to overstitch just to make sure everything is secure. So let's say I went up. Let's go up. So now I'm going on to the next one. This button down here will take me into big jumps. So 273, 325, 273, 377. So I'm going up significant larger jumps of stitches. I can also dial in the stitch number if I happen to remember what that number is. Some people are really good. When their thread breaks, they'll remember what stitch number they're at. So if it was 484, I would probably, to go back, I would go 474, check mark. Now I'm there. I can pick up from my embroidery stitch and go ahead. That's probably the one button that we all use because our thread always breaks or something happens. Okay. So I've done my editing the way I like it. Now I am ready to stitch it out. Now my button on my head of my machine has now turned green. It means it's ready to start stitching. Okay, we have one more option that I want to talk about on the screen, and this is the move hoop. Now, if you were doing endless embroidery or you had a line of motifs that you needed to embroider, we could use this to line up when we reloop. Now I'm going to use my dials, and as I do that, you can hear that my hoop is moving to the right. I'm going horizontal. So I literally could move my hoop so I could line up my hoop where I want it to start. This will be the vertical. So I'm moving my design down. Now I'm only going to be able to go so far before the red comes up. Now that's telling me that I'm outside of my hoop area. So we can go back, or I can just calculate on here brings me back to where it was originally positioned. So this move hoop icon will help you line up when you're doing continuous or endless embroidery.